officially welcome you to the first ever Town Council election forum hosted by Sigma Mountain Middle High School. My name is Ethan Fell, and I will be your moderator for tonight. As Public Relations Director for the SMMHS Student Council, I'd also like to say how honored and grateful we are to host this event. It was truly an amazing opportunity, and we are so thankful to the entire community. Tonight will be broken down into 4 segments. Opening remarks from the candidate, about 45 minutes of general questions, 30 minutes of candidate-specific questions, and closing statements. A few reminders before we begin. If you do not wish to come up to the mic or simply want to have your questions submitted ahead of time, you can either send them into our online question center, which can be kind of seen on the whiteboard over there, but it is a poll everywhere system, and you can go online and do pollev.com/EthanFell867, and if you see a student council member, I'm sure they'll be able to tell you what that is, and submit their questions there. If you do not wish to do that, however, you can go outside and get a note card, and you can also write down your questions there. As well, if you're hungry or thirsty, we have refreshments outside, which our friends at Pruitt's Market have so generously provided. We'd also like to thank the SMHS Theater Department and Film Department, who are currently providing sound and technical equipment for our live stream. As well, we'd like to thank our principal, Dr. Harwood, the school faculty, the League of Women's Voters of Chattanooga, our student council advisor, Mrs. Llewellyn, and Mr. Paul Hendricks for their efforts in putting together this town hall. We'd also like to thank all the candidates for their participation here tonight, and it's my pleasure to introduce the candidates for the Sigma Mountain Town Council. Please hold your applause while I've read off all the candidates' names. Mr. Rick Saputo, Mrs. Susanna Murdoch, Mr. Dunn Monroe, Mr. Bill Lusk, Councilman Dan Landrum, Mr. Rob Hensley, and Mr. Joe Jurek. Please give it up for the candidates. We are happy that all of you are here to express your opinions on the issues and that the school can serve as a vehicle for civic engagement in our community. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the forum, which will begin with 90 seconds of opening remarks. As I said, each candidate will be afforded 90 seconds to introduce themselves, and we will begin in alphabetical order, beginning with Mr. Jurek.
I'm Joe Jurek, and I'd like to thank you for being out here tonight. I want to just clear up a little point that was in the Chattanooga paper the other day about the Charter Review Commission. I served on the Charter Review Commission. Unfortunately, in the paper, it showed that I didn't put that it was Charter Review. It was not an elected position. It was the Orange County Charter Review Commission. I want to clear that up because after that article, I have a sense of honor to go ahead and tell people what it actually was. And what I'd like to talk about in the next minute and a half is to talk about how I feel about this job. What I did is I wrote a job description, because I'm looking to become your council person. That means that you're my employee. And at the top of the charter, it always says that the citizens. So I put down here that the employer is the citizens of Sigma Mountain. And I listed the duties, because if you don't know the duties, first you got to find out if you can do those duties, and then you have to understand how experienced you are in those duties. So some of the duties is, and it's not necessarily in order, but is a liaison with the citizens. It's important. I don't think we have enough communication between the town council people and the citizens, so that's liaison. You got to know budgeting. We're going to get into a little bit, I'm sure you're going to ask some questions, but there's so many times that they put in the budget and there's actually, in the contracts, it's actually over the amount. A lot, sometimes $120,000, $130,000 after they do their estimates. Well, that's not acceptable in the world of business or government. And you got to develop a controlling growth. And that's critical. I stopped a road from being built in Orlando when I was down there because it was a small little town, a little bit smaller than this town. There's just 5,000 people. So you got to be able to control growth, be able to go out there and still have your growth. But there's a line in an Irish song about growth. It's called Dublin in the Good Old Times. And it says, the gray unyielding concrete made a city of my town. And I do not want the gray unyielding concrete to make a city of this town. Thank you.
First of all, again, thank you all for being here on this very ugly rainy night. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Rob Hensley, and my wife, Arlene, and I have 4 kids. We have 2 boys that attended Sigma Middle High School, currently in college, and then 2 girls that we've got a senior and then a sophomore. And to me, there's really no better place to have a forum like this, because this represents really what is wonderful about the town. If you think about, and I think sometimes we take it for granted, what the town has done and what the community has done to support the schools. And I was talking to somebody who's in school administration across the state of Tennessee, and we were kind of telling them some of the things we did between MEF and Founders Fund and just the town donating. And they said it was really unheard of. It was unheard of that we spend over $7 million, and we spent $7 million just to get a high school up here on Signal Mountain. And it was unheard of that we raised over $1 million because there wasn't enough startup funds from the county. So we raised over $1 million from our own pockets just for startup funds. And then it was unheard of that MEF and sports boosters and band boosters and theater boosters every year raises hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's really what is wonderful about this community, is the community is supportive of it, not just supportive of education, but really backs up education, and they care about the academics, the arts, and the athletics, and really puts our children first. And that's why I'm running, is I'm excited and really love this community for that reason. So thank you.
So I'm Dan Landrum, and first also want to thank the students and the staff for all the detail that's gone into making this work. And you've made it easy for the candidates to prepare for it, so it's been great. That same attention to detail is up to us now. As you guys ask us questions tonight, it's our turn to answer them and to make our pitches as to why you should, in about 3 weeks, cast your 3 votes for 3 people that are sitting up here. 3 is an important number in our city council, because that's how many votes it takes to pass a $9 million budget. It's also how many votes it takes for a resolution that would sell our water company, or it would be how many votes it would take in order to send us back down the path of deciding to split from the Hamilton County school system. 3 is also another important number, because that's how many minutes citizens get at the beginning of council meetings in order to speak. And it's enough time to make a point, but it's not necessarily enough time for you to have a conversation. I'm wanting to remedy this by using some opportunities that are given to us by the Open Meetings Act that would allow some forums where there could be ongoing conversation with council members as well as citizens. In addition to council work, in my past couple of years on the council, I started videoing meetings and sharing those, and they're now all live streamed. And feel like I'm just getting started. I'd like to continue that work and ask you to vote for me to keep it going. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Bill Luss, and I'd first like to reiterate my thanks to Ethan and the Student Council for making this forum possible. I've lived on Signal Mountain in the town for 50 years and had plenty of opportunities in my career to leave, but I never found another community that could compare to Signal, and that's why I'm here. I spent 38 years in the transportation and logistics business, during which time I had the opportunity to serve on our council for 10 years, from 2006 to 2016. In addition to that, I served the town on the regional transportation planning organization with water and wastewater treatment board, which really wasn't much fun at all, and the municipal planning commission. I think we accomplished as a council during those 10 years a lot, and I have a very strong feeling that is a team sport, that we all have to work together cooperatively. We have to listen to our citizens, we have to solicit citizen input, and then we have to follow up on it.
Mr. Monroe.
Thank you. I'm Dunn Monroe. I was born and raised in Chattanooga, so I'm sort of a local yokel. I've lived here 42 years. Why did I move up here? same reason probably everybody else moved up here. I liked what I saw. It's a small mountain community with village, friendly people, and it's safe. It's safer than Chattanooga, even though I love Chattanooga, this is still safe. I went through Chattanooga school system, graduated from City High School. Went to Emory University 3 years, minored in math and English, came back to UTC, and earned a degree in accounting. And I took a federal job with the Postal Service because they have a lot more office than just the local businesses. We have 5 vacations. Joined the National Guard, served 20 years as Guardsman and Army Reservist. On Signal, I coached for 12 years in baseball. I've attended over 90% of council meetings over the last 11 or 12 years, which I think is pretty good. And I really desire to be a responsible citizen. The reason I did this, I've also attended many work sessions. They have attended all the meetings concerning the water system and the meetings concerning ISD. Now, if you want to say I don't know this, that's a little bit embarrassing, but I wasn't. I'm basically conservative, especially with county money. I do not like the idea of borrowing millions of dollars and passing on the back of taxpayers, unless it's absolutely positively necessary. But that will be gone through with a fine-tooth comb to determine its necessity. If the idea of the ISD comes before the council, again, I will vote against it. And I'll say some comments for later on.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Signal Mountain Middle and High School and Dr. Harwood for hosting us today. My name is Susanna Murdoch, and I'm a lifelong resident of Signal Mountain, and I'm running for town council. I'm running because I want my children to be able to raise their children in this amazing community that we have had the privilege of living in. I've had it for my whole life. In fact, most of my 49 years have been spent here. In order for us to be able to do this, however, it's going to take some intentional planning and some proactive effort. I'm committed to giving the citizens of Signal Mountain a voice in the management of our home's future. My priorities are to help create transparent and effective systems of government and to take a proactive approach to the inevitable growth that our community is facing so that it will serve as a blueprint for Signal Mountain's future. I hope to create methods for citizens to give their input, especially with regard to consequential issues that affect the future of our community. My skills managing budgets and people in strategic planning and its implementation will facilitate my passion for making a better Signal Mountain for tomorrow. I have a varied background running nonprofit agencies and working in sales and marketing professionally. I've been married to my husband Mike for almost 20 years and have 2 children, Anna, who's 15, and Jack, who's 12. My name is Susanna Murdoch, and I'm running for town council, and I'm asking for your vote tonight.
Thanks everybody for being here. Let me start out, since we're in an educational setting, I'll go through my own educational experience. I dropped out of high school at age 16 in New Jersey, so I could attend the Georgia Institute of Technology, where I earned a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and what they now call an MBA. I've lived in the Chattanooga area for the last 40 years, the last 10 years on the mountain. So I would fall into what is a large part of the Signal Mountain demographics as well-educated, professional, and not originally from here. But why am I sitting up here? Why am I seeking office? Well, like many of you, I took an interest in the big issues that were coming to started attending council meetings. So I will say that it was the council itself that inspired me to run. Like most of you, I believe I fall into the silent majority. I go on with my life despite politics. But from what I saw in the council, and especially when our sitting mayor, after he would not respond to questions on the salary of the water company, looked at me and said, well, we have to continue to do stupid things because previous councils did stupid things. I believe he was referring to annexations and fire halls in the past. I don't know what other issues, and I guess he was talking about the possible sale of the water company as a continuation of that course of action. Now, I believe I'm the only one sitting up here that has any utility experience, and that being utility and power with TVA and utility and water. My parents owned and operated a small community water system in New Jersey. I have many views on many issues, but one of the things I also observed in the council was that there was not enough communication, at least two-way communication between the town people and the council. I'll comment on Dan Lander. I've told him before, Dan, I don't think I'm running as an opponent. I think I'm running with you because I believe Dan, from my experience, was the most reasonable, sane person on the council. But I think his voice was continually drowned out, so I think he needs some help up there. And as far as other views on politics, I would favor minimal government and minimal taxation. I believe everyone should pull their own weight, regardless of what that is, what that involves, and what whatever they're pursuing is, and not just rely on government to take action. I'll save any comments on any particular issues from where I get to talk. Just because I got to spoke last, remember that when you get to a ballot, they're in alphabetical order too, but you don't have to start at the top. You can start at the bottom.
Thank you all very much. We are now going to open up the floor to about 45 minutes of general questions that you are going to ask to the panel in general. In this case, you are going to ask an open-ended question that any of the candidates may answer, and about 3 or 4 of them will respond. So unfortunately, not every candidate will have the chance to speak on every topic. However, if you wish to see a specific candidate's point of view, you may ask them later during the candidate's specific questioning or another time. If you'd like to ask a question, please line up one at a time at their microphones and please be in an orderly fashion. So you may go ahead and get up if you have a question. I'm going to go ahead and read the first question that was submitted online a few days ago. So candidates, in terms of the MAC, is there a plan in place to make the MAC self-supportive? If yes, where can the citizens view this plan? If no, what would you as an elected town council member do to promote the MAC becoming self-supportive?
I'll take that. So I do exactly what we've done over the past years, organize citizens to donate money and donate time. There's a work bee this Sunday. I think it starts this Saturday. It starts at 9 o'clock. And you come to the MAC, you'll join other citizens that are scraping doors, that are painting walls, that are scraping floors, and have donated, I think now in excess of 1,000 hours in order to make the MAC self-sustainable.
I do think there is a plan that folks have been working on for a long time. I can't add significantly more to what Dan just said, but except that we now have a 501c3 and the ability to collect tax-deductible dollars to support the MAC. It's a great facility, great programs are offered there, and it's widely used throughout the community.
If no one else has anything, yeah.
Well, the simple answer is, you've got alternatives. Do you want to put $500,000 in that building, or do you want to spend $3 or $4 million on the building? And that would involve
operation with needed maintenance and rate corrections, selling, or maintaining ownership and letting another utility operate.
Can I talk? I agree with the MTAS comprehensive study that has just recently been done. We've got a water system that has got a lot of great benefits to it. Our town owns it, which I'm a big fan of at this point in time, and I hope that it will stay that way for a long time. MTAS has done a very comprehensive study, and I think that if we could have a further study done to look at the feasibility of all viable options that are on the table, then we can make an informed decision. And I know we've got a lot of citizen advocates who have spent countless hours studying this issue. And I believe we need to let their voices be heard and let them participate in this important decision. Water to me equals life. And so I feel like we are far from we are far from being able to make an informed decision on that topic right now.
What I did when I knew that the water was an issue, I went to the town council under access to public records so I could read the contract for both Tennessee and Walden, as well as knowing what kind of repairs that we would need for the town. One of my concerns is that for Tennessee, when you take a look at their contract, they're only giving us $125,000 a year for 5 years. That's $1,250,000 for repairs. I think all of us know there's probably a lot more repairs that needs to be done to our system, and $1,250,000 is not enough. So if we're going to go ahead and sell it, we've got to make sure there's enough money in there so that they can make any kind of repairs. And if we're not going to sell it, we need to know exactly the amount of money that we're going to need to make those repairs and have a system that can last for a lot longer than the current one without those repairs.
Let me give you some information that really hasn't been discussed in the council, not coming forward. The issue, I guess, according to the council, of what to do with the water system has been going on for 4 or 5 years. Over that time, I won't say they've been neglecting the system, but they really haven't been putting full faith into maintaining and supporting it. Now, the story that's been put forward is it's going to cost too much to maintain and operate. Let's look at the plain black and white truth by law. By law, the water system must operate as a separate accounting and financial entity from the rest of the town, so there's no burden on the town. Whatever it costs, we're covered by rates. As far as what work is needed, that amount of work is going to be required regardless of who owns and operates it, so there's no argument to be made there, with the exception of one being a profit-making company that you probably have to add another 20% on top of that. Now, I believe this was viewed as a money grab. Take the money from the water system and use it for other purposes. There again, go back to the law of Tennessee, which requires that the municipal utility not be operated as a revenue generator. It requires that excess funds in a municipal utility be returned to the customers. Now, that's not taxpayers, that's customers, because those are two different sets of people. Customers being far smaller than the taxpayers of the town. So that is something to consider. Why, really, what would really need to be done, and would it really make a difference? Because if you maintain control in the town, you're going to do the same amount of work anybody else would do. If you establish an intertie with the Walden's Ridge system, you then have a choice of the water supply, and then you can couch those two against each other. Well, hey, Tennessee American's going to sell us water for this much, Walden, what can you do? And that will help hold down rates.
Can I make a short statement? I've come to the conclusion, believe it or not. I went to all the meetings they had about the water system, both water utility and Tennessee American. Walden water is better. I know it's better. It tastes better. It's clearer. From what I've heard, I'm not sure anybody wants to sell that system. And besides that, the rates are going to go up no matter what you do, so why not keep the system? It's an asset that belongs to the town, and I think we should keep it.
All right, thank you, candidates. Now moving on, Super Mountain is currently proposing to amend the current livestock ordinance to allow the keeping of goats on lots larger than 2 acres. Concerns have been raised regarding the potential for E. coli exposure to people and communities, as well as the growing coyote problem. Do you support this change to allow the keeping of goats or not? And please explain your position.
So there aren't very many properties that are going to be able to keep goats. You have to have 3 acres to have 3 goats. If you have 3.5 acres, you can have 3.5 goats. Actually, I think you can have 4. Dogs all have the same problem as far as what happens from one end of them to potentially increase E. coli. All animals do, raccoons do. I mean, that's part of nature. Our E. coli problem is not from animals. It's much more complicated than that. So this just came out of Planning Commission, and it's going to go to the council. It basically, for those who have residential estates, you could already do this. This just allows people who have a lot of property like a residential estate to do the same thing that residential estates can do. And there aren't very many properties affected in town.
I don't see anything wrong with having a goat right here. And in my mind, which might be a little silly, do I like goats better than cooking, or do I like cooking better than goats? I don't really know. But I'm kind of ambivalent on it, except I think it's acre per goat. I don't see anything wrong with it personally.
All right, thank you. There are currently a lot of concerns regarding speeding issues in neighborhoods. How do you plan to address those in relation to what's already been done and what your current plans are as a potential council?
To me, speeding, and it's particularly having teenage kids, I think that's certainly a significant issue, and certainly with the amount of texting that goes on and looking at phones, it's a different situation than it was 10 years ago. And so, to me, the one thing that always slows me down, I've been known to probably have a heavier foot than I should, but it's really increased police enforcement and visibility. That tends to slow things down. I'm not a big fan in general of speed bumps. I think that's all sorts of issues, but and to me, in general, where people speed is probably fairly consistent, and so increased enforcement is, to me, one of the easiest ways and most cost-effective ways to do that. And then I think from there, we can also do speed studies and those type things. Those tend to be a little bit more expensive, but I think just increased enforcement's a good place to start.
I live on North Palisades Drive, and that road is traveled heavily by bicyclists, runners, walkers, and also by fast motorcycles and folks with sports cars. I certainly brought that to the attention of the town manager some years ago, and the challenge they typically come back with is, gee, there's not enough traffic on the road. Or perhaps there's just not enough traffic at the time they test it. But I think that's a significant issue. We did install speed tables, which are preferable to speed bumps, not as rough to cross. Did that for a couple of those in Pittsburgh, and the folks who had requested that to be done had said at the time that it was meeting their expectations.
I think in terms of speed, I agree with Bill. I walk on roads around the mountain all the time with my friends on the weekends. And it can be kind of scary at times when there's a pedestrian, you know, when we're walking and there's a car speeding around a blind curve. And I think part of what we've talked about in looking at strategic planning in the future is to create more bike paths, more pedestrian safe walkways. So controlling speed by cars is definitely a viable and important part of that conversation that we need to continue.
Just one quick thing to add to that. Speeding is a nuisance. citizens who report speeding, that's not a nuisance. And police presence changes based on the kinds of reports they get. So it's important for citizens to let council members know, let the police, they want to hear from you where problems exist. And police presence is what changes things quickly.
Do you favor the efforts of State Senator Todd Gardenhire and others to introduce and pass legislation which would change Tennessee state law to make it possible or easier for the town of Signal Mountain to create an independent school district?
No.
Okay, anyone here to explain on there?
I think putting a mechanism in place would do nobody any harm. It would probably do good if someone chooses to go down that path. But if there is not a structured requirement or a path that you can chart to go through that process, you basically will be working in the dark. Things won't work out. Having a process in place does not mean any particular town has to pursue any issue. At least if they go down that road, they can pursue it a fair amount.
I don't see how it's fair, truly. If taxpayer dollars have gone to build these community assets for all of Hamilton County, I don't think it is fair in the least slightest sense of the word to consider changing the law so that a municipality can take control of those buildings. I'm adamantly opposed to this.
We cannot afford anything they do, we have to borrow money for. I understand schools right at capacity. We do have to build another building, 3, 4, 5 years. We have to borrow the money. And I think what Suzanne said, that's not all our money. The county still holds the lien for, I think, $16, $17 million. And under his proposal, we're supposed to just get that and still the county taxpayers think, I can't do it. Let me take just a second here. Let's see what our school is. We have an MIT star. We have at least 2 perfect scores on the ACT in the last couple of years. 5 or 6 merit scholarships. 7 IB international high scores. Graduation rate 95%. Average scores on the ACT 27 out of 36. Average scores 1,200, 600 on SAT. Teachers are in the top 26 of 380 schools. The school is 34 top of 380 schools, and the school is 1,958 in the top out of 18,800. Why would we get rid of what we got? We have a great school. We have what I call a trifecta. You have the teachers and the students. Anyway, they work together. Students want to study, the teachers teach. Receptive students, fantastic. And then too, teachers are getting a little skittish about the retirement program. That's what I'm going to go into that. But bottom line is, we've been left alone, and we have accomplished a great school. So, let's don't even think about pulling out. We've got it made, let's keep it made.
Let me make sure I'm clear. I'm not advocating an independent school system, but I don't believe there will be a problem with having a known road to travel on if someone wants to go there.
Great comment.
Yeah, and I agree with Rick on that, because currently it's well established and it's fairly straightforward how any community, and so this isn't just about Signal Mountain, but any community in the state can establish an independent school district. And it's not up to the town council. It wouldn't be up to the town council. It's up to the residents to vote and approve an independent school district. So just because you change state law with respect to this issue, currently the only people that get wealthy on this issue as far as the building are the lawyers. That's the only ones. And so this is the only, everything else is fairly laid out, fairly straightforward. And just because you have the ability or a community has the ability doesn't mean that they're going to take advantage of that. But I do think it's important that communities across the state have the opportunity to decide how they're going to educate their kids. And if they decide that it's best for their children to form an independent school district, and again, I'm not saying that's where Signal Mountain is. This is bigger than Signal Mountain because it's state law, not specific to Signal Mountain. I think it's important for the residents of each community throughout the state to figure out what's best for their kids, particularly when some communities across the state are in desperate situations when it comes to their schools.
You know, as far as it's gone, the county students probably can't go to an independent school. The Waldo students are such, of course, we're asking them to get several $1 million, maybe some of them get go. The Roberts Road kids, the Saturday days, you don't get to come up. Okay.
I want to bring it back to the question about the garden hire bill. The vehicle already exists for creating an independent school system, and it sets a fiduciary standard. What we're looking at is changing that standard to make it easier, and Signal Mountain was already just barely on the edge of being able to afford to do this. I mean, and that's what scares me. The counties, the cities that have done this around Memphis, which is where most of the attention has gone, have a large industrial base. They have lots of commercial business, and their towns are funded off of local option sales tax. The local option sales tax is a minuscule portion of the budget for Signal Mountain. Signal Mountain is over 90% property tax. And doing something like this puts any burden for improvement. I agree, and Rob and I have spent a bunch of time talking about this early on. I agree that it's possible that we can do this, but the burden for improvement falls on property owners. And I think it's potentially a financial disaster in the future as you try to make them better when they're already good.
Well, I'd like to add that Tennessee is, if I'm not mistaken, 48th in the country in education. And I think if you pass laws like this and make it easier for these kinds of independent school districts to be established, you're setting a precedent. And I'm not sure that that's a healthy precedent that needs to be set. I'm not saying that Tennessee's got it all figured out, because we don't. We've got obviously a lot of work to do. But I think Signal Mountain is doing it well, and we're doing it right. And also, it's my opinion that part of what doing it right means is to support all of the schools in Hamilton County. It's our duty. We have a moral obligation to support all of the schools in Hamilton County, even the Title I schools that don't have any kind of resources in the same way that we do. I would hate to keep all those resources up here and not share them with people who are our neighbors and who live in our community.
Can I correct just one thing right there? Because I think it's important to realize that, and again, independent school district is not a town council issue, decision point. Unlike the water system, the town council can decide that issue. Independent school district, the town council cannot decide that. It can only do what the citizens wants to do to begin with. But the notion that the money would stay up here and just go to our schools is not accurate. What would happen is we would continue to pay into the county and get the average money spent back on the students on Signal Mountain if we were to form a school district. And so and that was throughout the state. So everything continues to get paid into the county. Your county taxes would still go into the pot, and then it would get split up and you would get the average. And so I think it's important, particularly on some of these, and I'll admit, it's fairly complicated and also sometimes difficult to I think a lot of people think the town council has the power, but again, it's the citizens. And I think we're here to do the citizens' will.
A quick reminder before we go on to our next question, just speak up a little bit. Some of the mics aren't picking up quite. So try to speak as loud as you can. Representative Hazelwood.
Thank you. I am Patsy Hazelwood. I am state representative. I really don't have a question, but I want to clarify a couple of things. First of all, Tennessee is not 48. Tennessee is the fastest improving K through 12 educational system in the country. We still have a lot of work to do, but we've made a lot of progress.
Thank you.
In the past 8 years. So, hooray for that.
Where do you know what our rank is now?
I think we're not halfway, but we're close. We're sort of in the mid-range.
Like 20, like so halfway.
Yeah, 20, in the 20s somewhere, low
That's great.
30s, something
Okay.
like
I
that.
stand corrected.
However, what we have to keep in mind is that we look at international rankings, and the country is only 15th internationally in science and math. So being halfway in the U.S., still, we have a lot of work to do. I'm not denying that, but it's not as dire as you might think. The other thing I want to clarify a little bit, Senator Gardenhire's bill, as it was written last year, would not only provide a path, which might be reasonable, but I think the issue I had with that bill is the way that path would have been provided. And it basically would have allowed Signal Mountain or any other city to confiscate the building that the county had built. So that was a real issue for me with that legislation, and I just want to make those 2 points. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Patsy.
Actually leads to my next and final question, the general question portion, and that is in regards to public schools in general. Our public schools on Signal Mountain serve families from the town of Signal Mountain, the town of Walden, and and unincorporated Hamilton County. What do you feel the role of the Signal Mountain Town Council is in our public schools? That is in terms of when you intervene, when you don't intervene, etc.
Well, I think it's, perhaps, well, I don't know, you're right, the town council does vote on it. After, might be wrong, but, will you read that question again?
Yes, sir. Our public schools on Signal Mountain currently serve families from the town of Signal Mountain, the town of Walden, and unincorporated Hamilton County. And what do you feel the town council's role specifically is in our public schools, whether that is intervening, advising, etc.? What do you feel your role as a council member would be in the public schools?
Mine is to stay away from the ISD because we're going to cut students out if we have it. I just said the Walden people might not be able to go. County kids probably won't be able to go. So we're doing well. Just leave it be.
Can I? So this comes down to legal terms.
What standing does a city council have in a school system, in this school system, the way we're set up in this state? And we have very little. Now, as a council and as council members and as representatives of the town, we have the same thing available to us that everyone else has available, in that we can try to get help from the county, which is where money for the school systems comes from, and we need to start showing up at county meetings and asking for that, and as well as show up at the school board meetings to ask for that. As far as the ISD is concerned, the council spent the better part of about 2 years spending time and putting together a task force and paying to send them to another town to look at all that. So the council does have something to do with it, and it would be the council that would vote to put the referendum on the ballot, and the council would have to pay for the referendum. The town would have to pay for that. So I agree that it's a referendum. The citizens have to vote.
Right.
Exactly, yeah.
I was going to kind of concur with Dan, but I'm not sure 100% yet. But basically, plain and simple is the town is not in the education business. Dan was mentioning that your routes are through your county commissioners, your county school board members, and following your desires, your concerns through that. In addition to the school administration, if it's something that can be handled there. Now, if it were to change, then the town can get involved. Other than that, the town does not have a financial responsibility for the school. It's all on the county as things exist now.
And why did we spend $4 million on schools?
We have a moral responsibility. I mean, if our schools are in trouble as a town council, we need to be doing what we can that those paths exist.
And I'm just worried from a financial standpoint.
Well, there are some things, though, I think the town can do to positively impact the schools. One important issue is infrastructure, providing a safe route to school, looking for grants through the Safe Routes to School program to build sidewalks along Chicago Ridge. We already years. But I also think that we need better access to the middle high school. In particular, a new entrance specific to the middle and high school that we could accomplish by working with the state and county and local governments.
Mr. Durr.
I agree with that.
Two weeks ago, I had a chance to meet with Dr. Johnson in his office at the headquarters for the school system. Because I think we've got to build a better relationship between the superintendent's office and the town. And what we talked about, and I was amazed at how much he knew about what was going on up here. And we talked about building a second road into the school system. We talked about even getting down to getting better bus service because, you know, you can't put the band tuber on the school bus. And these things matter, so we've got to have a better rapport. And then we also talked about changing hours, or so some people would like to see the hours of the school change. So those are the things that we talked about, but if you don't know the superintendent, there's no way to learn what they're thinking about, and for him to learn what we're thinking about.
Yeah, just, to me, public education is the second most important public service that we have on Signal Mountain. So, and we have the investment as a town.
We get walled and pay $10 million, and that's why this high school is here. And so while we don't have a standing per se, I think it is imperative that the town council be engaged on these issues because there are many issues that impact the town, whether it's the use of the fields, the use of the gym, that end up impacting us across. And you know, to the extent that the schools start to fall off, that ends up being a backdoor tax for those that end up moving away from the mountain. So the quality of life for many people, that's why they're on Signal Mountain, in the town of Signal Mountain, is because of education. So we do have I think as Dan said, a moral interest to make sure that we're at least attuned to what's happening with the schools.
In terms of the collaboration, I mean, tonight is a great example of why I think the town does have a stake in the schools up here. And I think, you know, more collaboration and anywhere that we can makes a lot of sense. We do have 3 schools up on our mountain, and students from all over the mountain attend those schools. So while I agree with Dan, I think we do have a moral obligation if something came up and they were struggling, or if we were, you know, having a hard time paying teacher salaries for the arts and things like that MEF provides. You know, maybe in that scenario we could try to step in and assist them, or at least consult with them to help the schools navigate difficult times. But I think we do have to keep in mind that we've got students attending our schools from unincorporated and walled-in areas, and so they also have a stake in what happens in our schools here, and we need to be mindful of that.
We live outside walls, just a little bit outside of Walden. Coincidentally, I'm kind of following up on Ms. Murdoch's statement, but my concern has been, Mr. Landerman, he said that essentially if the school district, or if the citizens decided that, you know, they were going to create their own school district, would that be just the citizens of the town of Signal Mountain, or would it be, how would you include people who are affected by this, who are outside the city limits, to be included in that referendum? Because I'd probably vote against it, honestly, because I live outside the city, as well as live in the unincorporated areas. But my question is, if it's a referendum, would that referendum be confined to just to the people of Signal Mountain, or would it, I don't see there's any practical way that we can include all the other people that are affected by this, and that doesn't seem fair to me. So I guess my question is, I'm asking you to educate me on how would referendum work?
I feel like
How it would encompass everybody that's affected.
I feel like an independent school district, it would require a level of cooperation between
The three areas of the mountain in order to execute that plan and make it work effectively, but the management of it falls strictly on the shoulders of the town of Signal Mountain municipal government. And so that seems sort of impractical to me in terms of just a logistical management aspect. I'm not saying you couldn't work through that, but I think there are too many unknown factors that are within the scope of responsibility of trying to do that. And the thought is, what if we did create an independent school district? What if they decided to build a school in the unincorporated part of the mountain? And so all the students who've been coming to our school start going to that, and so they pull away from Signal Mountain schools. How does that play out? I just have a lot of questions about the red tape involved.
They're the only ones that can vote on the referendum. And further action, which I did answer, it's up in the air as to whether the kids from the county or how many can go to that school if Signal wins this. And our Walden, and our the Roberts Mill kids. It's Signal Mountain.
Well, if you back up a little bit, with the viability committee, what they did was study this issue, and they identified 3 obstacles. One was the buildings, one was exactly what you're talking about, and the other is the finances.
How does that part? And so, to me, right now, there's obstacles that would prevent an independent school district being formed on Signal Mountain, and those are the 3 obstacles. If you don't clear those, to me, it doesn't make sense at all. That doesn't mean just because you clear those that it makes sense, but certainly until you clear those 3, it's not even really worth discussing because, and that was the viability committee, their charge was to find out what are the obstacles, if any, and they identified 3 very large obstacles that it'd be difficult for us to overcome.
Yeah, and just to back up what Rob's saying, their determination was this is viable if those 3 obstacles were met. And I think it's good for all of us to realize that that was the final decision. Now, I think Rob and I maybe disagree on whether or not it's a good idea or it's a bad idea down the road. I think he's a nice guy. We don't dislike each other because of that. But I don't think he would want to also exclude the rest of the mountain because we all live in this little landlocked area, and I think we need to do more to pull this all together and look at it from an overarching, solutions to our problems.
And just to that point, I thought you brought up a great point that I think many overlook. None of my friends do I go, are you in Walden or the unincorporated areas? This is the mountain. Mm-hmm. This isn't the town of Signal Mountain. This is the mountain. And that's what makes it a wonderful place is the mountain, the entire mountain community. And I think that sometimes gets lost in this. This isn't about dividing the mountain. It's about the entire mountain.
And
everybody, all for one.
That's why it just seems impractical to me to try to do that. To try to put it into a referendum, you couldn't do it.
I agree. And that's exactly where the viability committee landed is.
Yeah.
There's that issue. How do you do that?
The problem, though, was that it did divide us somewhat.
The referendum would be, are you willing to pay for it? Danny, and Robo, what you say sounds good, but we levied the action. Walden did it. County didn't levy the action. Legally, it's our holders only, legally. I think I'm right there. I hope that answers your question, Barry.
All right, thank you, candidates. This is going to wrap up our general question portion of the evening. We are going to transition into candidate-specific questions. So if you want a candidate to clear up an issue that they brought up already, or you wanted to hear a specific candidate's position on a certain issue, this would be the time for you to ask a candidate or several candidates in particular. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with the first question, which is addressed to Mr. Saputa. Mr. Saputa, how do we address the declining commercial development problem in our community? What methods would you propose to help improve and support our local businesses, specifically exterior conditions and empty spaces and buildings?
First, I don't feel it is the purpose or responsibility of any government to grow the community. However, it is the government's responsibility to make sure that that community grows in terms of commercial or residential development in accordance with the wishes and desires and the needs of the community. You have commercial properties. Commercial properties exist to make money through rent. They make money through rent by having viable businesses. Viable businesses require a consumer base. If that doesn't exist,
you cannot have involved business. Nothing the town is going to do, short of buying up the property and doing something with it, or letting somebody use it rent-free, is going to change that.
All right, and if another candidate would like to also answer the question. Mr. Monroe.
We might have 5 available lots or properties for rezoning. 3 of them have been turned down at request for rezoning from the past. I think it's starting to see traffic light going down near none. You got Bluffs on one side, go to on the other, starting with Regis Bank, Walden owns one side all the way up. And there are, I think, maybe 2 lots. That's just the building part on the lots. That leaves us with the Signal Plaza and Signal Crossing. Hopefully we can talk to these people maybe, and let them go out and drum up the business. We can't, as Greg points out, we can't go out to the city and say, I like this business you come to our town. We might be able to advertise in the paper legally. We got a nice town, we come up with ideas. The only trouble with that, we have been horrendous about supporting business on that. So if we ask somebody, how much they go broke, what do you got? But I will try to work with the owners of the Signal Plaza and Crossing to see what ideas that, I don't know the council or not, maybe the individual, see if they can come up with ideas of what kind of businesses they would like in there. Let them go out and do the campaigning for the business. That's my thought.
I think it's not necessarily the business of the town to attract businesses or to, I mean, of course, we want to support businesses in the way that we can, but, and I don't think we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel here. I'm sure that we've had ad hoc committee talk about this before, and so I think it's possible to try to harness the creativity of a lot of the people who live up here, who are our stakeholders, and try to help business owners who are struggling come up with ways to redevelop their businesses. And if the businesses aren't occupied, then maybe there are things that the town could do to try to incentivize or stimulate the sale of those properties. I don't know that. I'm offering a suggestion.
I think this issue is probably one of the more important issues over the next 10 years for the town, simply because, and it's not just the businesses, but it's really, given where we are, particularly with Amazon coming in, I think Sears filed today or yesterday bankruptcy, and so you have all the brick and mortars that, there's great little mom and pop shops up here, but they're just going to face more and more pressure as people, it's so easy to click online and find it cheaper, find exactly what you want, and that's going to be more pressure. So I think that the obstacle for the town is, and while we've got a blueprint kind of through the land use plan, I think the difficult part is how do we make sure that we get strong, viable businesses? And I think whether it's, I'm going to say an economic development director, I don't like the town paying, but I think it's how do you help the towns, kind of like they've suggested, how do you help the businesses in the town rather be more successful? Is it, regenerate the Mountain Business Association, something like that? But right now, the Espresso Mart's empty, the bank next to it's empty, where Max's was empty, and that is, I think, is going to be a challenge as we move forward over the next 10 years. And so I think it's important for us to figure out, and probably one of the best things we can do is go find out how another small town is doing it. Rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, how's another small town doing it? Find that benchmark so that maybe we can steal some of their ideas rather than really it being an expensive, burdensome cost for the town, which I agree. It's not for the town to run the business and everything else, but at the same time, we also don't want a lot of vacant buildings.
All right, the next question is addressed to Mr. Durek. Do you support moving the town from septic to sewer systems? Why or why not? And explain what you would do as a council member.
Well, I'd probably like to remove to the sewer system, only because I'm on a septic tank, and sometimes you do have problems with a septic tank. So I think with sewer system, if it can be done correctly, if it can be done reasonably priced, I'd like to get a septic tank.
Just that's one of the things I've done is gone around and asked people, you know, what makes Signal Mountain a wonderful place to live, but then what can make it better. And one of the things I was surprised to hear was essentially, you know, move more to sewer away from septic. And this is kind of a thankless task, but you look at our contaminated creeks, where our children are playing, and one of the things I was surprised to learn is that there's really no long-term plan. I'm not talking the next 5 years. This is something that we really need to develop a long-term plan for the next 40 to 50 years, because it's somewhere in the cost of $10,000 per home to move it from septic to sewer. This is not something that's inexpensive, and so what we need to do is work with whether it's the WWTA, and I realize we're under a moratorium, but we need a long-term plan to figure out how do we improve the environmental quality of our creeks and really of our neighborhoods where our children are playing.
There's the best article I've ever seen in the newspaper today about a moratorium. Basically,
When it rains too much, you get pressure put on, well, if it's a sewer, on pipes have to crack them, pressure goes inside, pushes the sewage out into the ground, and there is a big problem. As to the cost, Rob, I don't know, but it's going to be very expensive. And I would advise everybody to go read that article. It's the best I've ever seen.
All right, minutes, and moving on to the next question addressed to Mr. Luss. With all our growth, traffic is getting heavier and creating more issues with safety and efficacy. What would you do to deal with this?
Well, I spent my entire 10 years on the council working with the Tennessee Department of Transportation to address that issue. There is a project on the drawing board that's valued at about $5.5 million that will help address rockfall issues, capacity, and of course repaving and erosion problems. But that's an important and an absolute must do for the town is to maintain constant contact with TDOT. Let them know we're here, let them know what we need, let them know about potential growth, because they're really the only ones who can resolve the issue on the road now.
All right, thank you. This was addressed to Councilman Landrum. The county currently purchases food services, janitorial service, bus services, staff insurance, etc. via large contracts. How could a small and independent school district take care of these issues?
I'm not qualified to answer that.
Well, if any candidate would like to speak on that issue, feel free.
Yeah. I mean, an off-the-cuff answer for that is going to be one that's not educated enough to answer it properly, I think.
All right, moving on to the next question. This one is addressed to Mrs. Murdoch. What is the role that recycling has in your home specifically, and how do you believe that the role of recycling has on the environment of Signal Mountain as a whole?
We are big recyclers in our house. You can come look at my garage and see. I'm so thankful that we have a vibrant recycling center, and I'm so thankful for where it's located, right conveniently near my home, right on Taft Highway. I think recycling, just being good stewards of the environment in general, and demonstrating that to our children is so important. And so we try hard to recycle as many products and waste as we possibly can. I have not started composting yet, but that's on the list. But I think everybody needs to participate in recycling, and I think even just the exercise of putting a recyclable in a garbage can to take it to be recycled makes you a more mindful person. It makes you respect the earth more, and it makes you remember that it's important because garbage is with us. It's going to be with us forever, and we've got to find ways to dispose of it properly. So that's how I would answer about recycling.
yes, I agree with everything you said. Matter of fact, we're such recyclers that my wife would recycle me.
I have
good fortune to be the leader of the Raster Environmental Club there.
We are the Planeteers there. And at our last meeting, I asked them to come up with big questions. You know, what do they wonder about? And one of the first questions, several of them were on the subject, but one of the first ones that came out is, will we ever figure out what to do with all our trash? And that's where these kids are starting, and we need to encourage that, because we've created a problem that they are going to have to solve.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Hines, did you favor or oppose the Food City rezoning request, and do you favor or oppose expanding the town commercial district beyond Albert Road to the town limits?
Food City question, let me back up a little bit. To me, the development question is one of the toughest ones that we're going to face. As I mentioned earlier, we're facing challenges from Amazon and everything else for our current businesses. And I think the other thing that the town is facing is growth. We're going to face growth. I ran into somebody at the soccer fields a few weeks ago who moved to Signal Mountain, and they have a animation/movie studio. They lived in California and said, where in the world, really, where can I live anywhere in the country? And they decided on Signal Mountain. And so with the remote workers, I think we're going to see more and more of that. So I think the challenge with Food City and any development is what's the right way to do it. At times, the Food City issue and other Albert Road, I would say in general, those were not good ideas because we have a long-term land use plan, and that essentially is the blueprint for the town. And that blueprint then enables businesses to operate within that blueprint, but at the same time, we have to figure out what kind of businesses do we want within that blueprint. Again, it's not government's job, and it's not the town council's job to pick the winners and losers, but it is important to figure out what kind of businesses best fit within that blueprint.
And on the other side of that, I think the whole Food City thing was not a development issue. I'm on the Planning Commission as well as the Town Council. And that vote was a rezone. And it was a rezone from low-density residential, which is the most restrictive form of rezoning we have, and we are mainly a residential community, to highway commercial, which is the least restrictive that we have. And it was going to change the property values for local residents. And I was against it. We don't, goes back to the development question, and I didn't speak up on that one a while ago, but we don't own the businesses. We only have 2 or 3 people who own all the businesses here, and we can't dictate what they do, but we also can protect people who have excellent property and landowners and property owners and take care of them. And I think that's first. There would have to be an overwhelming reason to change from low-density residential to highway commercial. And there would also have to be overwhelming citizen support for that, and there clearly wasn't for that one.
You know, in my opinion, as Dan rightly pointed out, there were going to be a number of property owners adjacent to that commercial rezone. And like a lot of folks, you know, their homes probably represent the majority of their net worth. And I just couldn't see doing that. And frankly, we have some great shops up here now. The Pruitts have spent a lot of time and money on Pruitt's Market. Great place. It's become a social center, if you will. And honestly, I just don't see what the big deal is about driving off the mountain to get whatever it is you can get up here.
When I found out they wanted to build a 38,000 square foot grocery store, and then I found out that the president of Food City came up here. And I said, that's unusual. I used to be a federal auditor, so when things are not necessarily in agreement, then I take a look at it. And I wanted to find out why he would come up here to go ahead and advocate. So I found out that he could not expand down there in Food City down at the foot of the mountain. The rents were extremely high down there, so their goal was to go ahead and get the store up here because they couldn't expand down there. They just recently renewed their lease down there, and they'll be down there for a while. And that's why I wondered why the president would come up here, so they had more of a reason than putting a store up here.
All right, thank you. This next question is addressed to both Mrs. Murdoch things first. I'll let you speak first. Yes or no? If you are elected to the council, would you be in favor of revisiting the ISD issue? If yes, under what circumstances?
Am I supposed to go first? I'm sorry. I don't think I am interested in revisiting that issue. Under the state of Tennessee law, Signal Mountain would be financially responsible for the school district, and it's not in our charter, and the buildings don't belong to us. I think any unknown costs that arise would fall on our shoulders as the taxpayers of Signal Mountain, even though you have students attending these schools who live in other parts of the mountain, which I know we've talked about annexing them in, but there's still so many unforeseen obstacles that I feel could come up. I don't think I'd be in favor of that at all.
Yeah, I think it really goes back to, as we were talking earlier about the three major obstacles. Those are major impediments. And again, just because you clear those doesn't mean that that's a cause to move forward with independent school districts. So before it ever came back before the town council, those three issues have to be addressed, and that's even before it gets addressed. But ultimately, again, it's the citizens that are going to decide. Certainly if the citizens don't want an independent school district, there's no reason for the town council to entertain it.
Thank you. And this final question is addressed to all the candidates. However, are you for or against the independent school district? Since it is not just anyone in particular, we'll just go down the line starting with Mr. Durr.
I'm against the independent school district for a number of reasons. One, we've already looked at it for one thing. It's not going to be as easy to get walled in because if you take a look at Avalon, which has an independent school district,
just north of there, they charge people that are not in that city to go ahead and come into the school system. They also have requirements for the students there to have certain grades, to have certain attendance rulings, because that's the only way they'll get in there. If you want to come up to our schools from Sequatchie County, you're going to spend over $3,000 right now to get your children into the school system up here. So I'm against the school, plus we spend enough money on it. We spent $4,000 on that trip to Memphis when 5 people went up there to go ahead and see what Memphis is doing, when they could have drove to Avalon Park and spent a lot less money. And that took $4,007 came out of the city when I asked for that records.
I think we've already discussed it, but it really comes down to those three issues. You know, until those get addressed, there's really not a question of whether or not the town council even has anything before it. So I think that's the challenge for the town council.
So I think the question is to pin us and get us on the record on this. And so the simple answer that I would say is that clearly, based on watching the council meetings, I think this is a bad idea, so I'm against it. But it's specifically because I don't think we can actually afford it. And the best example I can give is still that the ride at Lake Winnipesaukee, if your head just touches the guy who has his hand out, you know, like you're tall enough to ride this ride, you're the least safe person on that ride. And that's about where we were with this thing. So, and that's from an expense standpoint. I'm a self-employed person, have been for about 20 years, and I live in, I play gigs. I do things in Chattanooga all the time. It was not just causing problems up here from a communication standpoint with Walden and an unincorporated area. It was causing problems with folks in the county, like, what are you people doing? We live and work in a greater community, and I think we have an obligation to show that we're a part of that community. Not that this would necessarily hurt Hamilton County schools, but just even the way we're looking at it makes us appear to be wanting to separate ourselves more than we already are geographically.
I'm absolutely against an independent school district. And really what was so disheartening to see is the division that arose in our community from one neighbor to the next. And I'd really rather not see that again, so I'm absolutely against it.
No, I've been totally against it, have been from the start. It's, the cost is, the cost.
Startup costs, completely prohibited. I did mention the teachers were skittish about, in fact, I think some of them asked to be transferred. Can't prove that, but that's what I was told. We obviously can't afford it even further because we came up with an idea, well, we kind of squabbling for several $1 million. That ought to tell us something we can't afford.
I'm opposed to the independent school district as well. And I can say from a little bit of personal experience, because I work up here at the school, I'm employed by Signal Mountain Social Services, and I have a caseload of 30 children that I stay with starting 6th grade through the 12th grade. And I love the school. And I love being up here, and I feel like we've got a lot of momentum. We got wind in our sails again. We've got a wonderful new principal who is steering us in the right direction. We've got a new superintendent for Hamilton County who is doing a marvelous job. We've got Kathy Lennon as our school board representative, who is such an advocate and so energetic and wonderful. And we've got Chip Baker, who commission, who's representing our interests now. And I trust him. I think he is going to be a great advocate for our schools, and I don't see any reason to do it at all. We're in great shape.
I'm not advocating for independent schools, but
Everyone just looking at it from the same point of view, financial issues and concerns. If you looked at it a different route, if you knew all the answers, if you knew the path you had to take, and if parents of the students that would be attending those schools were willing to make the commitment, exactly what commitment that would be, I would call that tuition. Let them pursue what they desire. Do not place the burden on the general taxpayer. And I'm going to throw out a little bit more background on me too. I come from a family of 5. There's a dozen or so college degrees between us. My older sister, who has a doctorate in education, she's been in the classroom, she's been in administration. We threw around some school statistics nationally and internationally, and we were talking one day, what is wrong with public education in the United States? And kind of came to the conclusion is it's worth what you pay for it. But it needs to be more competitive like education systems around the world. And the way to get there, a lot of educators were thinking would be by tuition. If you want a good school, pay for the school, go to the school you want to attend. Now, could that happen here? It's a lot different than things have been. But it'd be something that could happen. Not that I'm advocating an independent system. I have no children in school. I have a 14-month-old grandson. Will he go to school on Signal Mountain? I don't know. But it's been visited. It can be thought of again. But there's no commitment to go ahead in any particular direction. It just follows my personal belief that the user of a service should be willing to pay for it, or the squeaky wheel should buy the grease.
All right, thank you, Candace. Unfortunately, we are now going to have to wrap up the questions portion of the forum, and we'll go straight into closing statements where each candidate will once again be afforded 90 seconds. Starting down the line alphabetically with Mr. Durham.
I have the pleasure of being a writer for the Signal Mountain Mirror. I've done a lot of stories
on Signal Mountain. I've done charities, schools, the police, entrepreneurs, the orchids. And I wrote 3 stories so far on the band out here in Signal Mountain. And I read one of the paragraphs the other day when I was preparing for this, and it talked a little bit about what we can do like a band does. And if you don't mind, I've got it mostly memorized, but I'll probably have to read it. It says, playing in the band teaches each member that there must be balance in the performance. The drums cannot drown out the clarinets, and the tubas mustn't drown out the saxophones for the whole song. They may lead during certain sections, but must come together, or it is not a song. And I thought about that, how it applies to our town. And I wrote that being a citizen in Signal Mountain should teach each of us that there must be balance in our interactions with others. The town council cannot drown out the citizens. They may lead during certain times, but they must come together with the citizens, or it is not a town. Thank you.
To me, the thing that makes Signal Mountain wonderful, one of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, is has a survey of really what makes Signal Mountain great. And most people kind of hit on all the same types of topics, which is the beauty, it's the small town nature, but almost everyone also kept bringing back to the community. And I think that's a little too soft of a word. And I was watching Mr. Rogers on a flight about a month ago, and he kind of brought up that it's really about loving thy neighbor. And I think that's what, it's really the heart of Signal Mountain that everybody loves. And while we may have differences on some of the political issues, it's really that heart and that love thy neighbor attitude that makes Signal Mountain such a wonderful place. And that's what we can build from, is that common ground, and then move to how do we tackle and address many of these issues and some of these opportunities that are going to be facing us over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think I've got the background, first 10 years in leadership experience, 10 years in the Air Force as an intelligence officer, and then the last roughly 18, 20 years at Unum, first as an investment analyst, and now head of investment strategy, managing more than $45 billion for the Unum investment portfolio. And so that gives me the financial wherewithal, and we're making decisions at Unum, not just for the next 10 years, but for the next 30 and 40 and 50 years, just like the town council's making. The other thing is I've been invested really since we've been here in the community, whether it was the Friends of Signal Mountain High School, a small part there on the board of the Founders Fund, and then president of the rec leagues. And so to me, this is an evolution from serving the country, serving the community, and now serving the town council, and I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
So thank you for letting me do this for the last couple of years, and I want to keep doing it, so I ask you to vote for me if you're willing to. I think it's time for us, as we move forward, to rebuild. There's a sense of enmity between citizens and staff and government officials that has developed over the last couple of years that I think it's time for us to heal that. But it's caused people to show up for council meetings, which is fantastic. And it's caused people to make their feelings known, which is fantastic. If we can move forward, we don't want to lose that. And it's important for us all to remember that the way our organizational chart is set up in Signal Mountain, there's a big box at the top that says citizens, and the council is underneath that. And so it's up to that. And we have what is considered, and I don't think as many people know this as they should, we have a weak mayoral system, meaning that the mayor is just the person who's supposed to chair the meetings, and it's a ceremonial position only. So it's a council of co-equals, of 5 co-equals, and we are supposed to take our direction from citizens. So please stay involved and rattle our cages, rattle my cage if I do it with a vote, though, at the election, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to serve.
My turn? Well, I'd like to thank everyone here and at home for investing your time to learn about the candidates' choices that you have. If you'll invest your vote in me, I can promise you, without a doubt, that I will always be accountable to you and responsive when you have issues. There are things like any candidate that I'd like to do. I'd like to stop the deficit spending that we've enjoyed over the last 2 or 3 years, and incurring some debt to do that. But also to work on reducing costs. I think we can always find ways to be more efficient. I mentioned the access road to the middle high school. I think we really have to work hard to get that done for a lot of reasons, but safety and the inconvenience of folks sitting in line forever. But we need to continue working on the highway up the mountain. And finally, we've long talked about and have been advised to make an interconnection with Walden's Ridge Utility District so we have an emergency backup source for water. If our pumps go out at the bottom of the mountain, we have several days of capacity in our tanks, but we'll be facing a serious problem. So thank you again for your attendance, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for coming. I Rachel voted for me. What I think I got, this may help you. I measured the attitude of the mountain, maybe even from the first day. We're conservative. We don't want a great deal of change. We have our own ideas. We've inherited some of these ideas, and we created some of these ideas, but they all go toward keeping Signal Mountain a small, peaceful, foliage-laden town. And that's kind of the mindset I carry into the council. Any idea that would come before me, I would, and Dan's good, if I was questioned, I would analyze, and then I would judge along with the other council members. I would try to talk to them and see what they thought. But I just like Signal Mountain. I would appreciate a chance to serve on the council.
Thank you to everyone for showing up tonight and for listening to all of us talk about these important issues. One thing that's been on my mind quite a bit over the summer as I was contemplating whether or not I would decide to run was the fact that the 100th anniversary, our centennial, is next year, and the relevance of that, because in some ways it almost seems like it hasn't been very long, but yet we've got a huge future ahead of us. And we have, we owe it to our children to not only honor our history, but to look forward to the future and to figure out what kind of sustainable growth can Signal Mountain handle. And I read something today that really resonated with me about what sustainable growth is. And it is that which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I would really like to keep that in the forefront of my thoughts and all of our thoughts. I hope that we can all get together in the future, in the immediate future, and in the distant future to try to alleviate some of the discourse that has gone on up here. I think civil discourse is a really important tenet to respect the institutions of our town government and not to necessarily live in an echo chamber, but try to listen to the perspectives of all kinds of people and to let people feel heard. I think there's been a lot of frustration on the part of many constituents up here who have felt that their voice wasn't heard, and it didn't matter, but it does. It does, because you all you are charged with the sacred task of voting for us. So on that note, I will say, please consider voting for me on starting tomorrow, October 17th, until November the 1st, and show up to the polls on November the 6th. And I thank you so much for considering me as a candidate.
Give you some information on my background and hopefully some of the views I have on some of the issues.
Like I said, I'm a member of the silent majority that goes on despite government. I believe here locally and nationally, there needs to be a movement in that direction. Let those who live speak up, not the extremes. Not that that's been the case here. Maybe some of the big issues, but one thing that came up, I guess, in some of the discussions was communication with the council, or lack thereof, maybe even lack of trust. I would like to see some more efforts. I know Dan's put in the live video of council meetings, but there should be more efforts. In an electronic age, there can be instant communication between the council, between citizens. Take straw polls on the internet. Hey, somebody is thinking about this. What do you think? Get some instant feedback. Not just show up, not just get the view of the council member, which seems to be what's happened in some of the cases here lately. Listen to the people who live here. Most of the town documents say Signal Mountain is a residential community, a single-family residential community. To be more specific, look at the planning documents. That's what people want, like I said before. The government exists to provide for the people, keep their desires and their needs. Now, when it comes down to election time, all I'll say is start at the bottom of the ballot and vote for the last candidate you heard talk tonight.
Let's give one more big round of applause. On behalf of the SMHS Student Council, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight, council candidates and all of you in the public. We hope this was incredibly helpful and informative for all of you, and would like to remind you that early voting starts tomorrow, October 16th, and that the election day is November 6th.